June 6, 1944. Thousands of men stare at the horizon. They are waiting for the signal. They are waiting for the end of the world. But 40 miles to the north, another army waits. You see the tanks, hundreds of them. They glint. Under the weak English sun, the turrets rotate. The engines hum. The soldiers wear the insignia of the Third Army. They belong to George S. Patton. The German reconnaissance pilots see them too. They snap photos. They fly back to Berlin. They tell Hitler the truth. The main invasion is coming to the Pas-de-Calais. There is only one problem. None of it is real. The tanks are made of rubber. The trucks are made of wood. The engine noise is coming from a record player. The entire army is a ghost. This is the story of the greatest lie ever told. Imagine you are a German commander. You are sitting in a bunker. You are looking at a map. You are the top of your class. You understand logic. You understand war. You know where the Allies will land. It has to be Calais. It is the shortest distance. It is the most logical path. Then your intelligence comes in. They see the concentration. They see the legendary Patton. The man you fear most. He is there. His tanks are there. Sense of Dafflin, but you are looking at a mirage. The Allies knew one thing. They could not win a fair fight. The Atlantic Wall was too strong. The German panzers were too fast. To save the world, they had to abandon the truth. They created the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a unit of 1,100 men. But these were not infantrymen. They were not snipers. They were artists. They were architects. They were sound engineers. They were advertising executives. Their mission was simple. They had to be loud. They had to be visible. They had to be the bait. They arrived in Europe with inflatable tanks. They carried speakers the size of trucks. They carried paintbrushes instead of grenades. Every second they spent drawing the enemy's attention was a second saved for the men on Omaha Beach. It was a suicide mission built on air. If the Germans discovered the ruse, the ghosts would die instantly. They had no real armor. They had no heavy artillery. They were playing a high-stakes game of poker with the fate of the human race, and they were bluffing with an empty hand. The sun sets over the French countryside. The Ghost Army moves in. They do not move silently. They move with calculated noise. They deploy the tanks. 2 men can lift a Sherman tank. It is an absurd sight. It is a comedy of war. But to the German scouting parties 2 miles away, it is terror. The ghosts use sonic deception. They have recordings of real tank engines. They have recordings of soldiers swearing. They have recordings of the clanking of tools. They blast these sounds through giant, multi-directional speakers. The sound travels for 15 miles. You are a German soldier in the trenches. You hear the roar. You hear the grinding of metal. You hear the preparation for a massive assault. You panic. You call the artillery. You demand reinforcements. And that is exactly what Patton wants. Patton was the face of the deception. The Germans believed he was the only general capable of leading the crucial attack. The Allies used this bias against them. They placed Patton in charge of a phantom force, the 1st United States Army Group, FUSAG. FUSAG did not exist. It was a bureaucratic ghost. Patton was furious. He wanted to fight. He wanted to bleed. Instead, he was a prop. He had to visit fake camps. He had to give speeches to empty fields. He had to inspect plastic tanks. He was the greatest actor in the history of cinema. And his audience was Adolf Hitler. The confrontation was not measured in bullets. It was measured in belief. The Germans were so convinced by the performance that they kept 15 divisions in Calais. They kept them there while the real invasion took place in Normandy. They were fighting shadows, and the shadows were winning. But there is a moral cost to deception. The men of the 23rd lived in a limbo. They were soldiers who could not tell anyone who they were. They had to wear different insignias every day. One day they were the 1st Armored. The next day they were the 4th Infantry. They drove trucks in circles. 2 men sat in the back of an empty truck to make it look full. Imagine the psychological toll. You are in the middle of the bloodiest war in human history. Your friends are dying in the hedgerows. You are blowing up balloons. You feel like a coward. You feel like a fraud. But your deception is saving thousands. The politics were brutal. High command treated the Ghost Army as expendable. They were often sent to the most dangerous sectors. They were told to draw fire. They were told to be targets. "Make the Germans attack you," the orders said. They had no real guns to fire back. They had to sit and pray. The artillery missed. The dilemma was clear. Is it ethical to use lies as a weapon? The Germans prided themselves on military intelligence. They were victims of their own logic. The Ghost Army exploited the human need for certainty. We see what we want to see. The Allies were sacrificing the truth to save lives. But in war, the truth is often the first casualty. The ghosts began to question their own reality. They spent months pretending to be other people. They operated in the dark. They spoke in codes. They created fake radio networks. They built an entire universe out of lies. And they had to live inside it. The war ended. The camps were liberated. The dictators were defeated. The heroes came home. They were given medals. They were given parades, but not the Ghost Army. They were sworn to secrecy. The Pentagon classified the entire operation. For 50 years, they could not tell their wives. They could not tell their children. They had saved perhaps 30,000 lives, but they had to carry that pride in silence. When they were asked what they did in the war, they had to lie. Again, "I was a clerk," they would say. "I drove a truck," they would say. They watched war movies that never mentioned them. They read history books that left them out. The consequences were bitter. Many of these men were artists. They wanted to share their work. Instead, their greatest masterpiece was hidden in a vault. The secret only began to unravel in the late 1990s. We learned about the atmospherics. We learned about the decoy airfields. We learned that the German High Command was still tracking fake divisions weeks after the war had ended. The deception was so perfect that it outlived the conflict. But why the secrecy? Why hide the heroes? The military knew the value of these tactics. They wanted to save them for the next war. The ghosts were not just veterans. They were a prototype. They were the beginning of psychological warfare, the beginning of the information age. They were the men who proved that the mind is more powerful than the tank. Today, we live in a world of shadows. We live in the world the Ghost Army created. Deepfakes, disinformation, cyber warfare. These are the descendants of the inflatable tank. We no longer know what is real. We only know what we perceive. George Patton once said, "War is a simple, bloody, smiling business." But the Ghost Army proved it was something else. It was a game of illusion. They were the soldiers who never fired a shot, yet they won the most important battles. They were the men who turned rubber into steel and silence into victory. We owe them our freedom. We owe them the truth they were forced to hide. But as we look at the world today, we must wonder, who is bluffing now? The ghosts are still out there. They just use different tools. They use algorithms. They use screens. They use your own biases. The war never ended. It just became invisible. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Sun Tzu said it. The Ghost Army lived it. They were the artists who saved the world by painting a picture of terror. They were the ghosts in the machine. And now, I have a question for you. In a world where everything can be faked, how do you know what is real? Is a lie justified if it saves lives? Or does every deception eventually poison the truth? Comment below. Let me know your thoughts. The truth is out there, if you know where to look.